Wastie is one of the musicians. Deborah Rose, again, was one of the musicians. If you can wave, Deb, that'd be great. Tristan is also one of the musicians on the project. And then we've got Karen Gray from the University of Worcester on their tandem project, although you've finished now, by the looks of it. And she's going to talk a little bit later on about the evaluation and her research. So we are going to be recording for people that couldn't make the Q&A session today. If you've got any questions, you can either raise your hand or you can put them into the chat. Gemma will be keeping an eye on that. We're not going to have a break, so we're literally going to go through. So if you need to pop off for at any moment, that's absolutely fine. If you're having, it doesn't look like it, but if anybody's having any problems with their internet connection, if you just turn the video off, that tends to help. If that might resolve that issue. We've talked about muting. So, okay. So we just thought it'd be useful to start if anybody's got any feedback about the symposium that what they've seen or read or heard so far, just as a sort of starter to get some discussions going. Anybody want to start? Helen?
Well, just to say, really, I think you did an amazing job of getting it out there and getting getting everybody, the publicity was really good. And I wasn't involved in the project, but I heard a lot about it. So thought that was really...
Actually, Helen, could you just introduce yourself really quickly as you speak or ask a question? Could you just say who you are?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Helen Fountain, and I'm part freelance, part age-friendly coordinator for creative coordinator for Age UK Oxfordshire, part learning assistant at the Herbert and Transport Museum in Coventry, and part champion for the Culture, Health and Wellbeing Alliance in the West Midlands. So I've got lots of different parts, but I'm particularly interested in engaging older audiences with museums, and I've had quite a few years of experience of doing that sort of work. And yeah, just to say well done really, and I thought it was a really good project, and you great sort of comms and a great sort of message out there to everybody else, because I think it's really useful for other people to see how you were working and sort of take inspiration from that. So big thumbs up.
Great, thank you. Anybody else got any comment, just general comments? I'm not sure I can see everybody.
I'm Katie. Hello.
Hello. So in terms of what we do for the cultural sector, we focus on helping organisations become more family friendly, more and more.
I'm not sure if anybody, I can't hear Marianne.
Hello, sorry, I'm having a bit of technical difficulty here. Sorry. Okay.
I think we can hear you now.
Oh, that's good. That's brilliant. Thank you.
Can't see you though.
Oh, okay. Let's see if we can go back and back to meeting. One minute. Sorry. Can you see me now?
Yes.
Brilliant.
Hi.
Thank you.
Hi.
I'm fine, thank you. Thank you for asking. And I'm just kind of going to try and see if I can sit down so it's not as wobbly about as normal. Right, okay. We're settled. Is that better or worse?
Yeah, no, that's great.
Brilliant, okay. Thank you.
Did you have a comment about, you wanted to, as a general, any comments about the online symposium that you've seen so far?
Yeah, I thought it was absolutely brilliant. I really loved kind of the ideas that were coming out of just our suitcase, because it's a very lovely concept, and just wanting really to kind of learn more and learn from each other. Because I actually trained with to do reminiscence through the Open College Network with some museums and galleries, and we then went on to develop creative reminiscence. So I'm just now really kind of excited to find out what other people are doing, and any kind of good practice that people could share, or any major pointers in the right direction to kind of pick up and go. And I was looking online this morning, and the Museums Association have shared a kind of case study around a COVID-19 secure way of sharing reminiscence in lockdown, using podcasts and sending on the the suitcase or whatever container you have in advance, and then booking out the suitcase for however long time they needed, but then not taking another booking for at least a week, so that everything can be disinfected and have at least 72 hours to kind of become happy.
Yeah.
Before it goes out to the next residential care home. And then each object had a little number. So on the podcast, it tells you a little bit about the object numbers and some poses for questions.
Uh-huh.
And then, people can go from there, because obviously I've been in lockdown as a freelancer, and all my residential care homes have obviously been locked down too. So when I kind of saw what was happening, I thought, that's a great idea. That might be something that we could possibly have a go at doing. Kind of maybe contact some of them and see, what is possible, where they are at the moment, and just start those kind of conversations.
Yeah, definitely. I think we're all thinking, how are we going to deliver this now? Because obviously the Suitcase Stories that you've seen online was done in person, and the report. And I think that's one of the things we were going to perhaps bring up later on is how are people doing it now? So you're freelance, Marianne?
I am, yes. I work with a cluster of museums and galleries in Cumbria. I work a lot with schools, but also community groups. We work with anybody. It's a small charity, Cumbria Cultural Learning Network. So we do things like arts awards with kind of schools. We get involved in schools projects, community engagement projects, and obviously we've got kind of reminiscence, and we do quite a lot of work with our local Inspirer, which is our careers service, looking at the career opportunities that are available to young people in and around museums, trying to get them to think broader than just, everybody in the museum is a curator.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Gemma?
Oops, I lost you.
Katie had a question that she wanted to ask.
Sorry, I can't see everybody on my screen. So yeah, Katie?
I'm sorry, I can't be seen anyway. I was just, I think it's brilliant. The symposium is fabulous, and it was really insightful to kind of see how it had worked with the music. And what really particularly struck me was the interview with Ray Boswell, and the fact that it had obviously affected their loved ones as well, and that had a real impact on the participants and their families. And I think that's really lovely, and something that chatting to them as well, and kind of getting to hear what their experiences are and how it's had a big effect on their loved ones. I just think that was really insightful and really lovely to hear, and to see that it's had like a much bigger effect than you would first imagine, with it being just with the participants. So it was just a comment that I wanted to make, that I was quite really taken aback by that. I thought it was lovely.
Yeah, definitely. Does any one of the musicians want to comment a bit more about that?
If you do have any questions. So that
Tristan, would you like to just comment any more about the impact on the carers?
Yeah, absolutely. It was. So I worked in a variety of different settings, care homes, museums, and hospital, and each environment was really different. And I found the whole process incredibly rewarding. I'm very interested in some of those questions that have been raised already around continuing to support older people, especially those living with dementia, in this particularly challenging time. But I found in the care settings, working really kind of in close partnership with the staff there. And there were some really amazing homes we went to. I'm thinking of Bricklehampton Hall, especially had really amazing activity staff. And they were a really great bridge to the residents and just getting to know them better, because we'd go back over several weeks. And they were really great at just facilitating discussion and just making everyone feel comfortable. And I think, as I've found in all my kind of work, really, the music is just a mechanism to open people up, really. So you'd start with a song, and it would depend on the environment as to how many songs you ended up doing. In a hospital, for example, probably did more singing than looking at things in a suitcase. But again, in terms of the impact on staff, I felt like going into a hospital was such a interesting experience, because your music could just completely change the whole environment, the whole ward. And I know I could tell that the staff really appreciated that lift that the whole thing brought to the building. I've been doing a little bit of work online with a hospital, the JR in Oxford, since lockdown, and it's a similar thing. It's very difficult times, and I'm probably the only person they see on a screen who isn't wearing a mask in the hospital. But I'm able to really make very quick friendships with people using music, and the technology doesn't seem to hamper it. I don't know if I've quite answered the question, Jenny.
I think if you can talk a bit about the carers, like in the community, I guess. Katie was just talking about the impact on the partner, the family member.
Yeah. Well, there were definitely people who, I'm remembering another lady called Mary who came to the groups at the Needle Museum, and she was always brought by her son. And he really described those sessions as a real lifeline for her. She's a really lovely lady and had fascinating stories. And I think it was kind of the main thing he could convince her to come to in the week. And she clearly got so much out of engaging and with everybody else, and the music and the stuff coming out of the suitcases. She had endless fascinating stories we were able to capture. And I always felt with him in particular, he was so appreciative for having those groups, because like I say, it could just get them out of the house and get them seeing other people. So I think it was powerful for him, definitely.
Yeah, it talks about in the evaluation report, is he's one of the, I think it's the same person, he's one of the case studies, and it talks about he was really suffering from depression and anxiety, and for him I think it really just helped with his own mental health, definitely. Heather or Debs, have you got any other stories about carers? Heather?
Yeah, it takes me a while to think of things. So while I've been listening to Tristan, things have popped into my mind. I've sort of two instances. One is a lady who brought her husband to the sessions we had in Evesham, and she had to struggle from the car park with his wheelchair and get it along the road and get it into the building, through the corridor, over a lip in the room, struggle all the way to the table. But she did it. She came to every single session, or they both did, obviously, and she had a wonderful time. So it was helping him. His communication increased each session, but also you could see she was getting so much out of it herself. And the other thing that occurred to me was at Rashwood and other places, relatives would sometimes turn up in the middle of a session. And it immediately gave something for the relative, whether they're a carer or not, to communicate with their family member about. And I can imagine, Emma might probably be able to answer this. If under normal circumstances, when the say the children, the daughter or the son, come to the care home to talk to the parent, to meet the parent, is there a difference between just coming along to visit or coming along in the middle of a Suitcase Stories session?
Definitely. Yeah, there was I think when people come and visit normally, it tends to be sort of conversations of how are you, and are you all about your sort of health. Are you getting out to do things? Have you been around the garden? Some people do have, photo albums and things that I see families flicking through and having sort of reminiscence. But
I remember one lady whose daughter came in, and I've just been sat here racking my brains because I can't remember what the memory was that the resident had. But afterwards, her daughter, they'd sat together over an object, and her daughter said to me afterwards, "I never knew that about my mum." You know, it was something new that she'd remembered because of an object she had out of the suitcase. It's precious things like that, because it taps into memories that they'd forgotten they had. So if you just describe something to somebody, you know, you need that object actually in your hand, and it just somehow I don't know how it happens. You know, you say to somebody, "Do you remember when you were 5 or 10, or, you know, when you were married?" You know, and they can't think of things. But if you bring out that wedding veil moment, that will stick with me forever, because that lady just had a whole day's worth of memories because of a wedding veil, and it was just fabulous.
Brilliant. Thank you, Emma. Any more general comments, or you might have specific questions for any of us?
Could add a bit more about the carers if you still wanted a few anecdotes on that.
Yeah,
yeah, just listening to Tristan and Heather, I was sort of reminded of the Evesham care home specifically, because I found that there were many sort of spouses that were coming into the care home, and for them it was something that they really look forward to. And when the sessions couldn't happen, because I think a few times sessions were postponed there because of maybe staff shortage at the home, and how disappointing that was for them, because they sort of looked forward to it all week. And I think what was quite interesting as well was the music itself was something that was very important to these two particular husbands, that they were caring for their wives, but they were enjoying sort of reminiscing about, you know, old folk music, or songs like by John Denver, or we do a Beatles song, and often they were then suggesting songs. So it was not just the objects, but also the songs and the music themselves. They were enjoying having a conversation about music. I think they were I think that one of them was a musician himself. So I think they sort of enjoyed that level of conversation, which I think, as you were saying, Emma, it just sort of brought it away from perhaps just the health questions and the small talk. They could kind of get really involved with and excited about talking about music and memories. And I think it's just the power of how, as musicians, we were able to sort of build really good relationships with the carers in a supportive way. Because I was asked to go and sing for one of the women in her room. She was really, really struggling, very distressed, sort of shouting out a lot, very agitated. And so she couldn't join the sessions, but I'd go to her room and sing. And a few times it would coincide with family visits, particularly her daughter. And it was very distressing for the daughter to see her mum in this situation, because her mum used to be a dancer, a musician, very vibrant woman. And it was pretty harrowing seeing what she was going through. So for the daughter, there was one particular song. There was a list of songs that her mum liked. Her name was Sheila. So it's sort of Sheila's sort of jukebox list in the file. And then there were a few songs that she would ask me specifically to sing. And I think that was a comfort for the daughter, who did sort of send me messages outside of the sessions as well, and say, "Oh, I've just been playing Mum this song," and Mum sang along to a few lines. So I think it was sort of building, almost extending the care beyond the sessions as well. That was something that I experienced when I was in Evesham, particularly. And then in Bromsgrove, what I liked about that was that the carers in the centre were involved in the sessions. Every single session sat with us, and they were very much a part of it. And I found that created a much more safe environment, and everybody felt very involved. It was a very small circle, a very small centre, but the carers being involved as well. There was more conversation, more memories, and generally the sessions felt very effective because of the presence of the carers. I mean, I don't mean the partners of the people with dementia, but I can't remember the name of them, Jenny, the company in Bromsgrove, the ladies with the ladies who ran that centre.
Oh, the Methodist Church?
No, the one, in the centre by there's a war memorial statue, the one that's difficult to find near Asda car park.
Oh yeah, the VIP centre for
yes, they were yes,
Hall, yeah.
So I found that they were brilliant, that group. They called the VIP carers.
Yeah, great. Is there anybody, do you think there's any place when the carers there's a negative impact on the work at all, do you think?
I think sometimes it was challenging at the Bewdley home because the carers, I think, were clearly understaffed and were always having to come in and do and give medication, and sometimes it was kind of quite chaotic, and I think it was difficult for them to try and help facilitate and run a session as well as do their jobs, and they were trying to. I just felt for them because it was sort of, there was lots of different things going on at the same time, which sometimes caused a little bit of tension, I would say. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Heather, what do you think about, like, maybe more in the community? How do you find, if there's a carers being there, was there any negative?
Not particularly, but in general, there's sometimes an assumption. A carer will assume something about the person that you're working with. Oh, you won't get anything out of her, for instance. When we go into a session and we just take the person as they are, and surprising things can happen, and we have no expectations. But in general, I mean, there was one care home we went into where the final session we actually couldn't do because all the staff were on staff training, and we turned up and there was no one there apart from a young girl. And I really felt sorry for her because we were calm about it, but we were actually really cross because we felt for the people we'd been working with and built up a relationship with, and we couldn't have the final session. I mean, I feel a bit worked up about it now, and I felt, it was really bad organisation to have all the stuff on a training day and not to consider the impact on the residents, but also on us. And that 3 of us turned up because it was the final session. You were there, weren't you, Jenny? We all turned up, 3 of us, and couldn't do the session, and that really felt like a letdown.
Yeah. I mean, our policy is to always have the staff in the room in the care home, and we have the carers there. I think some people, people will go in and they'll just be left on their own, but certainly our policy is to make sure we have the staff there because we're not therapists. This is not arts therapy as such. It has a therapeutic kind of benefit, but we don't know those residents that well. So we just make sure that we're safe. So we have a policy that if there's no care staff there, that we don't run the session, which was, it was a real shame.
Yeah, but in general, the staff were great because we're going into their space, kind of taking over their space. So we need to work with them. And if there was one place where a staff member didn't come, there was no one there, and we explained we really needed to have someone there. And that once they understood, that was fine. But in general, I thought that all the places were great.
Jenny, did you have a question?
Well, it was more of a sort of continuation because it's very interesting what you're saying there, and it's absolutely right. I did the evaluation for the pilot of a version of Suitcase Stories. When was that? 4 years ago, I think.
Yeah, just to explain that this is Suitcase Stories 2.
Yeah, this is better and much improved.
Yeah, we've done one with visual arts. We also did a storytelling with reminiscence, and this is the music project. Yeah, so the first one.
It's so interesting to hear you moving through the different art form, different types of participatory art, and sort of seeing how they compare with each other. But I think I would echo talking about the whole carers and the disruptiveness, and that was, I think it's really brilliant to hear you building with confidence on some of those early sessions where we went into care homes and the carers, the staff had clearly not got the message about being present, and it also, to a certain extent, we found in some care homes, as you say, very disruptive. There was one care home in particular, which I threatened my parents with if they're naughty, where it was clear that the staff were all temporary. So we never saw the same, you know, over 6 weeks, I don't think we saw the same people twice. And it was extremely disruptive for everybody. And you sensed a great kind of disturbance in the force. But the other issue that we found, and I don't know if you found it at all, or if you've managed to build on that, was that in one particular care home, I think it was Evesham, the staff got so into doing the arts and reminiscence that the older people were almost pushed to the side. They got too into it. And it was really, and I don't know if that was because we were doing, that was art, and hands-on with paints and prints and so on. So I think I'm very interested, and I always have been, in how you as practitioners manage the room, and how confident, how has your confidence grown, or did you go in there fully formed? I know Heather has a lot of experience over the years. I know I've followed your career and you do a lot, but what are the big takeaways for you from this Suitcase Stories? I'm just really intrigued.
Does anyone want to answer that?
I could come in there. It's nice to meet you, Jenny, by the way. I think we've started developing a project you're going to be involved with the canals, and it's not happened, but hopefully it will.
Oh, good. Well, keep going.
Yeah. Well, no, so I run a theatre company in Banbury for young people, so it's a slightly different strand, but it's nice to see you. Maybe we'll work together in the future. Yeah, just on that point, I think, so we all came from quite different backgrounds. I learned a huge amount from both the training that was provided by Mindsong, which I found really useful because I'd never had any specific training, and just by seeing what Deborah and Heather did, because we all come from different backgrounds. Mine was, originally training as an actor, working as an actor musician, and then sort of finding a slightly haphazard route into singing in care homes and finding it very rewarding, but taking a long time to kind of develop repertoire and develop kind of inclusivity in my practice. Whereas kind of all my work until this project was quite instinctive. So I'd sort of ask for requests and get to know people and just sort of see what worked. What I found with the process of doing that training, seeing the other artists work, was I kind of affirmed a few things I had inklings about, but also in terms of being a facilitator, what I found really useful was that when I go into a care home environment, I'm obviously wanting to make it feel like a safe place where people can contribute and they can sing along and join in and request songs. But in terms of being a facilitator who would provide music but also facilitate discussion, I thought it was just really useful to kind of get out of the way myself, really, to be a questioner and to listen more, and to be less I'm here as a performer to perform for you and engage you all. And it was more that I'm purely here to facilitate this discussion. So I thought it was a really good, maybe that's that background as an actor and being the centre of attention, but I found it a really useful exercise in just getting out of the way and listening and guiding the conversation very gently.
Yeah, I think the training that we did was really important, and initially, because when I offered the work to the musicians, I thought, oh no, they're all really experienced, but actually I think each musician got something out of that training, and we've continued. Now we're doing another Suitcase Stories 3. There's always going to be kind of like a training element to what we do, because I think we had also 3 students from well, 2 from Birmingham Conservatoire and 1 from Kidderminster College, that came on really, you know, still learning and still in there before, you know, and 2 of them have already said that they want to continue, you know, doing this kind of work. So I think moving forward, talking about what we've learned, Jenny, through the projects, is definitely training element alongside this is really important, that we're keep building those skills and building the next generation of people to do this really important work.
I think I just wanted to cut in there because I worked closely with one of the musicians who was lovely, and that's one of those people who'd like to take it forward. And I just think it's such a positive experience for musicians, you know, of that caliber, much more impressive musicians than me, to just realise the different contexts you can use your craft in. And I don't think from conversations I had with Helen, she didn't get any of that on her course, you know. And so I think organisations like Arts Uplift sort of having a role in upskilling musicians is really important, because I don't know if there are many routes to do that independently.
I think, yeah, there's I think they snap their hands off basically, so just don't, like you say, they don't get that really important, you know, hands-on experience, and that relationship with, you know, which I think is really, really important.
Can I just
yeah,
I was gonna, it's a real shame that Sue Vale from the Museums Worcestershire is not here today and has gone off on some much needed annual leave, because obviously she was there in the delivery with musicians. And I just kind of wanted to say really that from our perspective, it felt like the museum staff and the musicians together were greater than the sum of their parts, really. And actually the learning, and it's something that Jenny and I have spoken about before, but you know, the learning that was between the musicians and the museum staff, and actually how that dynamic works in that space, and actually how they could, you know, get the best out of an environment and be able to adjust what they're doing and how they work. And I think the needs, depending on, you know, who they were with and the environment and the needs of that group, meant there might be more needs for a musician than there was for the reminiscence objects in the suitcase. And I think that kind of learning journey, you know, there isn't a one size fits all with this, and you know, that kind of longevity with the project and delivery is a really key part of it. Sort of going in and delivering something just as a one-off thing, I think it feels like that can be a bit more difficult sometimes. You know, you've got to be able to understand what those needs are going to be, and then sort of by the time you get to that, and that's why, you know, when you were missing that end session because of, you know, the lack of staff, you'd sort of been building up to that point because you knew the needs of that group, so you knew how you could end that and make sure that everyone got this wonderful experience. And it really took away from all of that work that had gone in before that point.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we were even discussing this before, just that the learning that happened between the musician, you know, and it was literally throwing everybody in at the deep end, and there was no, you know, maybe that's something we need to develop, is just some kind of where the museum staff and the musicians kind of come together before, and but you literally were thrown in at the deep end. Heather.
Yeah, I'm just going to quickly say that the relationship between the musician and Sue, or whoever's doing that role, is really important. And Sue and I think we're quite lucky because we built a rapport, a very instinctive rapport right from the start. We didn't have to work on it at all. And then late on, in fact, part of the way through, I began working with a different member from the museum, different person, and it was a real jolt because she was a very different kind of person. So we got used to working together. And then I worked with another one that each time, and because we hadn't met beforehand, we just had to go into a session and learn as we went along. But it worked because we were all there for the same purpose. It wasn't about us, it was about facilitating the group. And I managed to, you know, we got on fine, whoever I was working with. It was easiest with Sue because she's absolutely brilliant. I'm so glad that she did this project.
I think what was really brilliant about this was the stages, and like Tristan says about the training and how we did the group training together. You sort of had some theory behind it, because I kind of went in a bit blind because I've been doing it for years, but just going in and singing rather than doing something more interactive. So having the theory and then having the practical, and then moving into collaboration with a student musician and the museum. What I really enjoyed that, not just going in on my own, because for an hour or an hour and a half session, it's quite it's quite a lot of energy. You need to hold that space and hold that attention for that length of time with people with different needs. So I really enjoyed, sometimes Sue or Kathy, whoever I was working with, might say, oh, why don't you sing this song? So they would kind of come forward with musical suggestions for me, perhaps a song that I didn't know. And then working with Katie, who is a musician from the Conservatoire, she would do an instrumental piece on the clarinet. So it was lovely to be able to do a song, and then for her to do an instrumental, and for people to see an instrument, you know, a visual. So not just an object from a suitcase, but then another musical instrument. I just loved that sort of three-way collaboration of the museum, the musician, and then myself, just sort of trying to sort of weave it all in together. And I really loved that sort of three-part harmony sort of thing.
Great, yeah. Karen, did you have something to say?
Yeah, it was a question leading on from the discussion about the different roles of the different elements in the project. But I was wondering also about the different settings in which you worked, and what for the musicians in particular, Sue too, if she was here, but Gemma, you might be able to answer this. How was it different in the care home, in the hospital, in the community setting? What would you pinpoint as the key differences for the way that you worked and for the effects that you saw? I thought it was really interesting to have all of those three settings.
Who wants to go? Heather, do you want to go?
Yeah, I'll sort of start. I think I mean, for one thing, you had to, when you're working in the sessions that have been organised specifically for the project, you had to keep more of a note of who's there. So the museum staff member would be keeping a note of who was there, and because they had to pay, they're having to pay, maybe organise refreshments. So there was more organisation going on and there. Whereas in the care home, you could just go in and the session would start. However, you might walk into a care home and they're already sat there waiting for you, and you could just start. Or you go into a room and they gradually arrive. Because it was in general a group of people who already knew each other because they were living together and met each other regularly, there was more of a group feeling. Although new people did come into the group because they heard what was going on. I thought, oh, this sounds interesting. I'm going to go in. So the group dynamic did shift. Yeah, I suppose that's the main difference. It just felt more. No, we were more organised. Sitting around a table, it was more like because people were coming in. We had to organise it more than going into a care home. I hope that makes some kind of sense.
Yeah, I think working like at the Museum of Carpet and the Needle Museum, there was a sort of a sense of an event and a sense of an occasion, and things were very punctual. They start on time, and you know, coffee and tea and biscuits, and it was more as if it was a special event. Whereas then going into the care homes, it felt more that we were visiting, and obviously there's more distractions and disruptions, so they weren't as easy to do, and I think the quality of the sessions were better in those settings, in the museum setting.
I think it's about partly controlling the environment, isn't it? When you're inviting people into a space, you can set it up how you want it, but when you were going into someone's space, I mean, you talked about the VIP centre. That was actually quite a difficult space to work in because it was really, really long. And long and narrow, and we had quite big groups. So trying to communicate from one side of the room to the other was tricky, but it was fine. But that was what the space was. They'd got their routine. At a certain time, people always left. People arrived to collect at a certain time, so we worked around their schedule. And you knew, right, it was at times it was a bit disruptive, but we had to work with what was there.
I think there was oh, sorry, Tristan, you go.
Thank you. I just had one tiny thing about different spaces. We found generally a circle is the best way of working. But there's an interesting, I think in terms of starting to resume face-to-face work with social distancing whenever people are able to do so, because obviously we're talking about a very vulnerable age bracket of people to work with. I've always used an analogy in terms of music and participatory arts, which is one that was given to me by a stand-up comedian, which is if people are kind of shoulder to shoulder and a bit packed in together, they're much more likely to sing along and laugh and enjoy what you're doing. Whereas if people are really spread out, or if you're using, like Heather was saying, a really long space, it's a bit more difficult to bond people together. So I remember that person saying, yeah, you want people to fly EasyJet rather than British Airways. So I guess that will be one of the challenges if we start, well, with online work, certainly, and people in their own homes, or with social distancing. That will be one of the challenges for building that sense of community with a group.
There was one room that we worked in, which was absolutely tiny. And Sue and I were struggling to find space to get the suitcase out. And we had to sort of squash between people and kneel on the floor. But actually, it was a lovely care home and smashing sessions.
Was that the one in Haberley?
I'm trying to remember the name of it.
In Bewdley, because that was tiny, and more people wanted to come each week, and there was just no room. It was like a queue.
No, that was Offmore, I think.
Offmore, that's the one. Yeah.
None of you went to the same care homes. You all went to different ones. So I think that was Offmore.
Oh no, that was lovely. A lovely place to go. That.
So the thing I was going to just quickly say. So. From conversations with Sue, and obviously I'm just sort of speaking on behalf of some conversations we've had, I think there was a big part of the trying to work with these different spaces and different people was having to make a quick assessment of need, and the difference between the hospitals, the care homes and the museums, the rate of deterioration of people with dementia and different illness, it was completely different, and it meant having to change and adapt very quickly. I think there was, obviously, in terms of the reminiscence suitcases, obviously the kinds of objects, I mean, we've got 20 odd of these reminiscence suitcases in there. I should know how many off the top of my head, but I can't remember. But obviously the kind of objects we've got in there will depend, what people can actually manage and handle, depending on their dexterity or their illnesses. There's different things that they can handle and different things that they can work with in different ways. So being able to walk into that space and to quickly assess, okay, what objects are actually going to be suitable for this session, and for Sue, or whoever's there from the museum team and musicians suddenly change what they're doing and how they're working. Because I mean, there's only so much you can ask these venues or these groups beforehand what they need, and when you actually get there, I mean, as you can tell from the off-floor session, you never, more and more people kept turning up, and so you never know, there was usually a core number of people who came along to each session, but it would change and adapt, which meant that obviously everyone needed to be kind of quick off the foot to be able to deal with that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think even, I went and observed every so often, and I can remember one of the last sessions, I think it was with you, Tristan, I can't remember the care home, but literally just the move from one room to the other, and at the table, the difference with the table, and gone from table to a chairs, and it was like completely different session, and just didn't work as well, so it's so important to get those things kind of right, but it's very hard, when you're working with care homes, there's obviously many other residents that you have to kind of keep an eye on, and work with, and just things do shift and change, but that flexibility is obviously really important, but just how much a change of room or a change from a table to not a table was massive.
Yeah, I I know the game you're thinking of. Just when you were saying that, remembering how much of this project I spent on my knees, which is really unusual for me. But that a part of that came out of the training with Mindsong, since I've always stood up when I'm doing singing, just naturally, and I'm a 6'3" person, and actually it was so much more effective. We talked a bit in the training about how that I could be quite an imposing figure, and it's a bit harder to connect with people when you're towering above them. So I felt getting down to people's levels in any setting that you're in was so vital, and I learned a lot of that from watching Deborah. Actually, I remember when he'd done the training, we first went to a care home to sort of try it out. Lots of you that will know, Deborah's just got this amazing peaceful energy that makes everybody just go quiet and lean in and listen. But I was just really inspired by the way that she'd just really freely move around a room and have moments with individuals, but also include the group. So yeah, that thing about setting was also you as a facilitator, and actually Sue with her suitcase did that a lot as well. You just get very comfortable with suddenly going down on a knee and being with someone for a moment. So yeah. I think the settings that allowed you to do that were the best. Tables did get in the way quite a lot.
Yeah. Emma, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just what you were saying about the environment and the carers, and I was just thinking that of the first week we had ours, there was a small group, and then it sort of escalated. And I think when that was going on, I thought, oh, how wonderful that there are so many people wanting to come and be involved in it. But actually, the quality, once you get so many people in there, I don't think the quality of the experience is as good. I think on reflection, I think this has come from lockdown actually, is that we've got these little bubble groups of sort of 4 or 5 people, and suddenly we're finding that we're having, that morning or afternoon is just with that bubble, and that's all we do. And they go away with a much better experience than if I've got 20 people in the room and I'm trying to help them all do an individual activity, because a lot of them do need help with things. And with the Suitcase Stories, I think the people that were sat round the table got a lot from it, but there was a lot of people sat around the peripheral, though we tried to include them, and some of them seemed happy to sit and watch, but actually they couldn't join in the chat that was going on around the table. There was sort of like the guys around the table and the others, and I think if we did it again, that we'd try and stick to those smaller groups. But it's really hard because obviously everyone was so excited about joining in. So yeah, I
mean, we try and say no more than 12, but yeah, it's very hard if you turn up and there's already
sorry, you can't join in.
Yeah, exactly. People sat there and you're like, oh, like you can't play. So yeah, it is ideal to have it's less so with the music, but with the reminiscence, it's because you're having more of that one-on-one conversation, or somebody speaking to the group. So you want to make sure everybody gets a turn to say something.
That was kind of my question actually. Sorry, hi, I'm Beth. I work at the Playhouse.
Sorry, where are you from?
Oxford Playhouse.
Oh, brilliant.
And we've done some participatory work with can't speak this morning. I've done some work in Daybreak Club, which is a club for people living with dementia, and then I'm a dementia champion for the Alzheimer's Society. So I thought I knew a little bit, and then reading your evaluation, I just found it really, really interesting. One of the things, again, you've kind of answered it, was if you're in a room and you're doing something and people have different needs, not only that flexibility that Gemma was talking about, but that idea of how do you be as inclusive as possible when, like you point out, that people might be at different stages in their dementia or have different needs, or things like that. I was wondering if anyone could speak to their way, things that they specifically done to sort of feel like that inclusivity, or whether you did something in the training to do with that, or how that kind of was incorporated. I know you kind of spoken to it a bit in terms of flexibility and things like that. I was just curious about anyone else had different.
Tristan, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I did. Hi, Beth. I just don't know where I read as well. That was another real learning thing. I think there's something incredibly universal about music. So whatever project you're doing, I think music is an amazing way in. And I'm sure on the next stage of this, which is more kind of creating theatre based, I'm sure you'll probably use music as well. It's a great universal thing, but also the objects. I learned a lot from watching Sue, spending time with people with perhaps quite advanced dementia, but they would handle something really tactile and lovely, and you just get very comfortable as a facilitator with spending time that was kind of quiet with somebody, but engaging with them and the object, or using the music and not needing any kind of response. And I think that's probably those of us who facilitated online a little bit recently know that it's a really different format, either with music or with working with young people or whatever. And you get a bit more comfortable with the fact that there are crashing silences sometimes, and you'll ask something and get nothing in return. And you just have to remember as a facilitator that you shouldn't feel bad about that. That's part of it. People will engage at their own level. So I really learned a lot just from, I know we've all talked about Sue a lot, but she is a really brilliant practitioner, and I learned a lot from watching her just engaging with everybody in the group in a different way. So yeah, it's being agile again, isn't it? It's finding what sparks interest for that individual person. And again, when you're working with carers and you can chat to them after the session, you get so much more of an insight as to, because they see they see a tapping of a foot to a piece of music, or a level of engagement from somebody that they don't normally see. And so lovely part of the process is actually, I found myself a lot of the time watching the carers, seeing their reactions to things, and that was a really beautiful part of it and very rewarding.
Heather?
Yeah, I think I tried to make sure that I had a meaningful conversation of some kind with every single person who was at the session. And one thing I particularly learned from the training was not to worry, if you're singing a song, for instance, not to worry about focusing in on just one person for quite a long time, letting them govern the speed, or listening to their really quiet voice and taking the music down so that you can listen to them. I think there was a fear in me that might mean that the rest of the group doesn't feel included, but actually they do. If you're doing it in that kind of way, the focus is on that person, and so that person then becomes really, really important. But everybody else is aware of that person making a difference.
Yeah, I can remember, Heather, there was a lady that used to, in the community sessions, that used to get up and walk around a lot. And I remember one time, normally you'd stand probably more and deliver to the group or go around individuals, but I remember as part of one of your songs, you were following her around the room. So you were kind of involving, I thought it was brilliant, you were completely involving her as well as the people were sat down. So you shifted what you were doing to accommodate that person that was moving around, but then also included, it was brilliant.
Yeah, we sang a song, I can't remember what it was, some sort of marching song, and yeah, and she was quite happy with that. It is a difficulty when someone is really striding around and making a lot of noise, and that did, yeah, that seemed to help on that occasion. I think I did try it as another time, and she didn't want it, and she told me, she didn't want that, which is fine. But yes, it's trying to find a way of engaging with every single person, and if someone is really, really, really hard of hearing, going close to them, trying to make eye contact, seeing what works for that person. I do remember a guy at Rashwood actually who'd got, every time we went anywhere near him, his hearing aid went wee. That was quite tricky, but he became more and more engaged. I'm not quite sure what the key was, but he started to engage just by speaking occasionally and pointing, and it was quite difficult going near him.
Yeah, Deb?
I was just going to add to that, what Tristan was saying about sometimes when that sort of silence would happen. And I found that sometimes if you sort of don't fear that silence and kind of just wait, and often it just takes time for the stories to come. And I remember when I think it was at one of the homes that we did towards the end of the project, one that got added on, I think it was in the Evesham direction. But we were told to go to the top floor where people had severe dementia, and we were sort of forewarned and told that we wouldn't get any information. Probably we could cut the session short if we wanted, because it's unlikely that we'll get any engagement. So you kind of go in with that sort of preconceived idea. Yet it was probably the most fruitful session I'd had of the whole sort of sessions, because there was one lady, and she wasn't talking then. All of a sudden she told us that she'd been picked by the government to become an explorer and go out to the Antarctic, and was the only woman chosen for this project. So she'd gone for, literally saying nothing. And then she said, and I can do the river dance. Do you want to see me do it? And, I thought, oh, well, maybe she's just saying that. But then she got up and she did the river dance for everyone. So she became the entertainer. So I think what I learned was sometimes even though it's uncomfortable, was just allowing that extra time for silence, for then the story to come out. But I think we often, even in our interactions every day, you just sort of want to, it's a natural tendency to fill that silence. So I was sort of making sure that I just tried to just hold out in that awkward silence and see what comes. Sometimes nothing did, obviously, and sometimes you fill the space with a song. But it was amazing, those stories that came. And one lady, she told me that she'd met this preacher in Westminster, and I remember thinking, oh, maybe it's, this isn't true, because she was speaking there was a lot of stories. It was all sounding quite elaborate. And then I went home and researched it, and this particular preacher, she had all the facts right, and I'm actually reading his book now. So I learned so much from her. So I think it's just those preconceived ideas. Sometimes we're told, oh, you might not get anything from this session, but meeting people at the same level and not going in with judgments because people have dementia, it's all about labels, that, we can gain so much from the people that we're working with. That was probably the one main thing that I took from the whole project.
Brilliant, thank you, Deb. Does that answer your question, Beth?
Yeah, no, definitely. It's really nice to hear people's sort of thoughts and experiences.
Is there any more questions, or we might move on? Oh, Helen?
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to ask if anyone's tried any of this sort of work via Zoom, and if they have, any particular tips or any sort of learning experiences you might be able to share, especially working with a group, perhaps in a care home. Has anyone tried that at all?
Tristan?
I have found one-on-ones are much better than groups. I'm happy to say I've actually as well. One, the weather was nice, so I did some really lovely sessions in gardens that was really beautiful. But yeah, having tried group sessions, for me, again, just, to re-establish the stuff I've learned from taking on this project, it's really important that the sessions are really inclusive and interactive. And I think being a person on a TV for a group doesn't work so well. I sort of tried it early on. So I've encouraged the homes that I work with to do one-on-one sessions, or sometimes with small groups, so sometimes with groups of 2 or 3 residents at a time. And the carers or the activity coordinators on the other side have, of course, become vital partners in that to help co-facilitate in the room. And I'm really lucky that some of the homes I work with in Oxfordshire, they just have great people who really can make it interactive for the residents. I have found that I'm sure there are kind of stereotypes about older people engaging with technology, and I have to say, for the most part, I've found that they've understood it and adjusted to it really well. I can see some people working in care homes and nodding, which is good. I think you do have to sometimes, like, for example, I'm doing sessions with the JR Hospital where I'll see, over 2 hours, I'll see maybe sort of 10 to 15 different patients. And so you are building rapport really, really quickly. What I've found really helpful is that I asked them to print a 1-page menu. So it had my face on and it had a few different songs from different genres I could sing. So it's a starting point. So you don't go straight in with meeting someone and going, oh, this is who I am. I'm at home in my kitchen. I'm singing for you now. What do you want to hear? And it's just a bit overwhelming. So they've got a bit of a steer as to some of the music I might be able to sing. But usually I've found I can establish a rapport quite quickly if you find the right song, and then you can get them to talk a bit about other music they're into. But yeah, exactly like people were saying earlier, it's more about focusing that conversation away from the fact that they're in hospital, which is awful, and on positive, memories sometimes brought about by the music. So yeah, I think there's good work to be done online. It is different and it can't replace being in a room with people, which is the best option. But that's what I've found so far.
Great. Gemma?
All I was going to quickly say, I think there's still a bit of trial and error to be found in this. I mean, we're in a sort of brave new world at the moment, aren't we? And, so one of the things we've been talking about in our museum service is actually how we go ahead doing these kinds of things when object handling is the fundamental part of reminiscence work. So actually, there's going to be compromise, and I think that's what we need to sort of accept from the off, is that, if we don't do something online, are we accepting that we can't do anything at all? Actually, is something better than nothing? So, I think there's a bit of, I think we need to sort of explore this a little bit more. And I think my sort of keen thing to continue on with really is to make sure that we're sharing those experiences, because I think we're going to start trialing whether that works online in some way. And actually, it's a shame that Sheena's gone, because she's actually starting a project at the moment. Worcester Live Stories are actually there looking to new things online as part of their sort of reminiscence sessions, as well as part with the historic environment records. So there's stuff going on at the moment. It sounds like actually there's quite a lot of learning to be shared. I think we just need to kind of start experiencing that and being quite honest with each other about how well it works. I think there might be a difference between going back to that, depending on what the environment is that you're working with, whether it be hospital, care home, or within a museum. I think the experience might be very different. Sort of object handling reminiscent with a museum background behind you might be very different to quite a clinical space. So I think there just needs to be a bit of thought around that.
Right. No, I think it's a conversation that we could probably have another whole hour on, which might be useful actually, considering we're all, what we're having to do, particularly over the next 6 months. I just want to make sure, Karen, that you have some time. You just wanted to talk a little bit about your research and your evaluation. So we can pick up on any more questions just before we finish. Karen, I just wanted to make sure you got your time.
Sure. And perhaps I can use, I did want to use the time that I have really to reflect a little on some of these questions that are coming up, which are, key to evaluation really. So Jenny asked me to talk about evaluation and to introduce my research, the PhD research I've been doing. And I wanted to really start by congratulating Jenny and Gemma and all her colleagues on creating these resources, the Symposium resources, and time and space to reflect. And I think it's really often quite difficult at the end of a long project to do that. And I just think it's really important that you have done it. So that's brilliant. I have been involved in evaluating arts, health and wellbeing projects for over 8 years now. I was also part of a knowledge exchange project with the University of West of England back in 2014, which resulted in creation of the Creative and Credible programme of resources and training. And I would just like to signpost anyone who's interested in getting training in evaluation towards the Creative and Credible website. And there are, I know some, I think there are 3 planned introductory evaluation training workshops in the next few months, which my colleagues Norma Dakin and Jane Willis are delivering. So they're just brilliant. But for the past 5 years, I've been really focused on the arts and dementia, doing a PhD on the subject. I was working in the Tandem Doctoral Training Centre, which was funded by the Alzheimer's Society, 6 PhD students, part of a collaboration between the Universities of Worcester and Nottingham, and I was in the Association for Dementia Studies in Worcester. And as I said, a lot of the projects were really kind of foundational things. They were looking at kind of the basics of what is going on in an arts and dementia project, how do you evaluate it, how do artists engage people with dementia, some really important kind of key questions. And my research was focused on evaluation, and I was really wanting to understand the challenges that people might face in evaluating this work, and to do that from the perspectives of everyone involved. And again, I think it's really interesting and great the way that Jenni has put together this symposium, because it does include all of those perspectives. So when people are diagnosed with dementia, a lot of aspects of their lives become quite medicalized, and we understand reasonably well how to evaluate whether or not physical or clinical care is effective. But the kinds of changes that happen might happen to us as a result of taking part in an arts activity are just a lot harder to understand, and they're certainly harder to measure. And we've heard today, I think, the same kind of things as people told me when I talked to them for my research. Things like, the atmosphere in the room changed after or during an arts activity. And how on earth do you measure that? I heard a lot of kind of magic moment stories, and again, we've heard lots of those today, those amazing moments when, the wedding veil came out and the effect of that continued throughout the day. Again, very hard to kind of capture in an evaluation using certain kinds of methods. And also the effects that people talk about often relate to kind of really quite abstract ideas, such as community or a sense of connection. Even these things like happiness and well-being, which, for lots of, there are no commonly agreed definitions for these things. And there's even less agreement or understanding of how an arts activity might cause changes that relate to them. So you can see that there's difficulties in the general effects of an arts activity. But logistically, and again, that's kind of what the question I asked about the settings, that, there are really practical problems. Lots of projects are a really small scale. And that matters a great deal for studies where we want to get numbers, quantitative studies, because, basically the larger the sample size, the more accurate statistical analysis can be. So it's very hard when we have a lot of smaller projects going on to really know how to harness evaluations of those smaller projects in useful ways. Evaluators often know very little about participants before they start, and it's the same for practitioners. Again, we talked about that already today. And so, just as it's quite difficult for a practitioner to go into a room not knowing, what they're going to find there, it can be really difficult to work out how the results of an evaluation are going to apply to other projects in other places that involve completely, different kinds of people. And it's really difficult to say whether an arts activity is the thing that's caused any change that we can measure. So, and as with this project, there are often lots of different elements of a project, and arts and creativity might be only one of those elements. Working in settings such as care homes and hospitals is challenging, and always kind of resources, time and money for evaluation is short. So those are probably the major challenges. Perhaps the most important challenge, though, is that very often the kind of voices, experiences, and the needs of people living with dementia are really poorly represented in evaluation, because it's hard to use tools like surveys and questionnaires when people have challenges with recalling what's happened in the past, or talking about their experiences of something. So it's really hard. The main recommendation that came out of my PhD research was that we should be developing approaches to evaluation that are really informed by a kind of 360-degree view of the values of everybody involved. Again, you know, I have to say congratulations to Jenni on really trying to do that in this symposium and through the evaluation. So, you know, artists, arts organisations, evaluators, the people commissioning the work, and people with dementia. And it's important that those values are not only about the kind of effects, what's valuable about the effects of the activity, but also what those people value in terms of the evidence that's going to be come out of evaluation. So I think artists need to feel really confident communicating about evaluation. They need to know how they can apply their findings to their practice, and they need to be better represented in evaluation, which I think means really that we have to move the focus to process rather than outcomes, and that's going to free up time and resources and help to improve practice. And it feels kind of liberating to me that we have been talking so much about the process of this work today. But I think that's really only going to be possible for organisations like organisations like this one, if there's a greater kind of collective set of resources available across the sector, and that we use those resources to tell kind of convincing stories to support our work. And I have to say that I think that funders such as the Arts Council are moving towards making this their kind of chosen approach. I think that's the case from what I have heard being talked about from representatives of ACE recently. If organisations do need to measure outcomes or impact, there are some really useful theory of change and logic models that can really simplify and focus evaluation. I was really pleased to hear about how Mindsong, the Mindsong training was really valuable to the artists involved in this project. I think that evaluators would benefit from training about dementia at the start of a project, and that would help them to choose the kind of methods, tools and frameworks that were appropriate, rather than kind of fitting the methods to the settings and to people with dementia. Rather than expecting the settings and people with dementia to kind of fit to the methods they were using. I had some sort of questions which came out of the videos in the symposium. One of them is related to this kind of, and we have talked about it a little already. Speakers talked about how the different elements in the project worked together, and I was really struck by there was a comment about how music particularly could even like almost change the physical shape or feel of a room. So, you know, you might bring people in, I think it was when you were talking about the long thin room, you might bring people in from where they were sitting in the corners by using a song. So that's quite an extraordinary effect that's happening. So you could make people sit up, you make people engage, you might transform a hospital ward because you've made connections between staff and individual patients. So that's a very particular effect that music's having. There was also a lot of discussion about community and the sense of a common bond formed within the groups. And I'm wondering how that was actually achieved. What was it that was creating that sense of community and bonding? I was really struck by Jenni's use of the New Economics Foundation's 5 Ways to Wellbeing in the evaluation, because I think it helps to frame an understanding of how well-being might be achieved in the end. And I suppose then, so those my real questions about the evaluation that you've done, which I think, you know, is great, and it's it's a really extensive piece of work that you've done, is these questions about what were the roles of the different elements? What part did a sense of community play in creating the effects that you saw? And I'm just wondering, given the chance to do it all over again, would there have been ways that you might have involved more people living with dementia in the evaluation? And I know you had the great interviews with the care, with Bob, I think it was, or Rob, which was amazing. But I was just wondering whether there were ways that you could use to involve people with dementia more directly. Those are my questions. I thought it was a great evaluation, and I was really pleased to be invited to kind of be part of the discussion. So thank you.
Thank you, Karen. That's really interesting, and there's a lot in there, and I wish we had more time. Really great, you know, to hear that the Arts Council perhaps is moving away from outcomes to process, because it is really hard to evaluate. And it's one of my comments earlier about, I found sometimes perhaps the carers were detrimental in the sessions in terms of they didn't allow the voice of the person living with dementia to speak as much, or they spoke for them. And definitely within the evaluation, sometimes, you know, some people asked, I mean, we did feedback, this is more in the community than the care homes, and we did ask, the carer or the loved one would ask that person with dementia, you know, what the impact was, but sometimes obviously they can't do that, you know, and it's just that carer's or loved one's assumption of the impact of what, because they know them and of what impact they've had. So how would I involve them more? I'm not sure is the answer to that.
It's really hard. It's really hard.
It's certainly, I think the observations of, because the musicians and the museum staff and myself, we all observed, having not known these people. So, it was, I think that was quite powerful and a good way. But, you know, you can't always communicate if people have lost a sense, you know, they can't speak anymore, or so I don't know the answer to that one. And your other question was around the community and how do we create that?
What was it? Because I was really struck that a lot of your speakers talked about that sense of community that formed within the groups. And I just wonder how that is created, and then perhaps, you know, how you might sustain it afterwards.
Yeah. Emma, did you want to talk about that?
Yeah. Oh, we really felt that in our home. The people that were sat round the table, I think a lot of it was that they were sharing their experience, their memories about the music and the objects. And they found, because I mean, although they're all living in the home, they sort of know each other on a level. Some of them are quite close, but others just sort of, you know, it's high in the corridor. But I think they suddenly realised they had a lot more in common. And it was that actually some of us are from the same era, and there was almost sort of a camaraderie about the memories that they had. Yeah, it was really, and like I said in my video, you know, even now, the guys that we had around that table, the ones that are still with us, still talk about their memories about the Suitcase Stories. We started collecting a few odd bits. It's amazing what you can find out there in shops. And you know, we tried to start doing the sort of our own little suitcase story thing. I have to say, I'm no Sue Vale. She's quite amazing how she does that. But yeah, that community, In fact, there was some friendships that were sort of made because of it. You know, because afterwards they could still have conversations about it. Yeah.
Heather, I think, do you want to speak, and then we're going to have to wrap it up, I think.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think it's something to do with feeling part of a group. And what came to mind was there was a woman who was at Offmore, and she was sight impaired. I think she had no sight at all. And she was very, very isolated, and she wouldn't really communicate. When she arrived for the first session, they said she won't stay long, which she didn't. But gradually, each session, she stayed for longer. And then she started to talk about her life, and she had a really interesting story to tell. And it obviously, she walked into the room, she sat down, and although she couldn't see anybody, we were communicating with her. There was music going on, which she loved, because her story was to do with music. And she felt included.
Yeah, I think, but this is not particular to this project, is it? We do arts activities and all sorts with all sorts of people, and people say, "Oh, I've met loads of new friends," or "It feels in such a community," and I feel that this is such a shared experience. I think it's not unusual, you know, in this work to have that sense of community. Karen, I just want to pick up one point you were saying about evaluation on large numbers, and I think, is there any conversations happening around with arts and dementia about kind of working on the same evaluation tools and methodology, so that we can work together on projects? Just think about the next project we're doing.
It's been a bit of a, I mean, that has been a discussion that lots of people have thought about that. It's really difficult because tools are, projects are so difficult, and work in different ways and involve different processes and with different populations. So there is, as far as I know, no kind of common. There is no sense that there should be a common framework of any kind developed. And I think even, I was talking about the Arts Council, talking about having a collective effort to develop a kind of sector-wide evidence base. That doesn't mean that we should all be using the same tool. It simply means that we might be able to rely on great evidence provided by or by particular kinds of projects that mean that we don't have to always continually be trying to kind of reinvent the wheel every time we work with six participants and evaluate their well-being. So no, there isn't a tool, I'm afraid, as yet. It's a holy grail.
Yeah, and I know every project's different, and I think, you can create this bespoke evaluation for that group you're working with, or that setting is really important too.
I mean, there are some, there are, if you work, for example, with something really simple, like the basis of the ONS, the Office for National Statistics Wellbeing, the questions, the ONS or questions, that is a really good basis for asking questions about well-being. Your 5 ways to well-being is another way to do it. Mm-hmm. If you use those frameworks, then at least you've got something comparative to other projects, rather than developing your own bespoke measure. Mm. Having said that, a bespoke measure sometimes speaks to your project much better than those standard measures. So it's really difficult.
Jenny, did you want to say something quickly? Do we need to unmute?
No. Yeah, hi, I really got to grips with technology. Very quickly, I mean, from my point of view, it's not so much the tool as the framework. So evaluating projects, I had this dream once that I would develop a tool that worked. It doesn't. But if it's the framework, the question bank, as it were, what it is you're looking for, if that is common, it means that you can then flex how you ask the question, the method you use. My feeling is that the biggest thing is investment in the research, because it is time consuming for small groups of people. As you know, Jen, I mean, we did that very first pilot on A Wing and a Prayer and an awful lot of, you know, I think I did it on for basically 4p a day for you, but I was interested to see how it worked. But things like observations, if you can't have a conversation with someone necessarily about how is this working for you right now, but you can observe that over the period of 6 weeks, a person's concentration span appears to have extended from 0 to 10 minutes, or they stayed awake, you know, they only fell asleep 3 times, not 7 times. But that all takes time, and that time has to somehow be accommodated within the project budget. And so often the project, I know I'm ranting, but for everybody on it, we all do more than we're paid for on these projects because we love these projects. But it has to be more than £1,000 for one project. You know,
so if you can
need more than one pair of eyes as well, because it's quite exhausting for all of us. It's quite exhausting running these sessions, because you're constantly aware of the temperature of the room and the temperature of everybody, and wanting to involve everybody, and having a dual mod. So very often, if I've done these sessions, I've actually worked with student interns just as much, partly to give them experience, but partly to just get extra pairs of eyes on the game. But then you also have to make it look, because I had, you know, I once accidentally sort of almost started a fight with a lovely lady, because she's like, why are you watching me? Well, you are the eyes, you know. And it was like, oh my God, no, I'm not your schizophrenic fantasy. You have to work out ways of being present in the room without obviously having a clipboard. And there's all sorts of noise, the static, that gets in the way of trying to be able to do it and do it well. And I think, again, I'd come back to, it gets better for me if I work better with the team. And so as an evaluator, being involved in the kind of logistical planning, and as you say, in that training at the very beginning, so we all are working from the same hymn sheet, so we're all working that room together. So I think I'd make that kind of my learning from it, and my feedback in would be that's what I would like to see more of. Yeah.
Really good points, really good points. And I think that the point is that, you know, we need to invest in, if we can invest in getting, if you as an evaluator can say, you know, we did this, and evidence over here collected by these people tells us that when they have done this kind of thing in this kind of setting with this kind of people, these effects have been seen, then you don't have to, you know, demonstrate those effects every time. No. Because you can say, look, it's happened, you know, this has been said, and then you can get on with showing how your project is unique and different and works in particular ways. And that's just really refreshing and interesting. And also reflecting participant voices.
Yeah, I think there's 2 things. One is that there are definitely different art forms and reminiscence forms that work better for different kinds of dementia patient, different settings, different people. But I think it's the quality of evidence, as you say. And I found Jane's course, I would highly recommend her Creative Incredible course to anyone. I did it just before lockdown happened in Hereford, and it was immensely both reassuring, like Tristan said, it was reassuring to know that I was doing some of it right, but also it kind of pointed to holes in my own practice, or things that I'd never even thought about. To grow forward. But I always say 2 things. One is, evaluation is not therapy. I'm not a therapist, so when I'm evaluating the impact on the people delivering it, the organisations, I'm not there to kind of cure you. But the other big thing is that evaluation must never get in the way of the activity itself. And the danger is, particularly if you have people who sort of might go in armed with surveys and stopwatches and everything, is it does become, and I've learned that the painful way, I've done the stupid things. Evaluation needs to be part of, so you build into the activity itself ways to check and balance how it's working as you go, that you're doing as performers. You don't even recognize probably that it's a form of evaluation, but that is what you're doing. You're monitoring as it goes. So working more closely together, I'd like to see more of that, without actually going to full on Stockholm syndrome, obviously, but.
Right. we're going to have to leave it there. It's just been absolutely fascinating, and I'm sure there's been lots going on in the chat. Gemma, is there anything that we desperately need to talk about, or?
No, there's been some really good discussions, and if people want to see, because I know that Shirley's shared some useful links and information in there, so there's been some some useful stuff. So we'll share anything around the group if people are interested, but there's no burning questions that come up, more discussion.
We can keep. Can we record that somehow? We've got that, haven't we?
Yeah, I've saved it. Yeah,
brilliant. Okay. So just a massive thank you for everybody that's come today and shared, and you know, and I'm sorry if you've got some more questions, but if you've got any more questions, do email me and I'll try and get you the answers. But there's a lot in the online symposium and the evaluation report, which is a bit sort of tucked away down the bottom. You know, there's a lot of information on there, and yeah, so hopefully, but yeah, if you've got anything else, just email me and I'll try and get some answers for you. Just to say, do keep in touch. I will send out the recording, and do sign up to our newsletters, Arts Uplift and Museums Worcestershire, and keep in touch with what's going on. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and do, you know, keep sharing kind of what you're doing as well. We're really interested, and I don't know if anybody else thinks that, but I think there's definitely another place for another conversation in this particular field of work. I think I know there's quite a lot online at the moment, but we haven't really touched on the whole online activities that are going on and what people are doing. So yeah, anyway, I think that was everything for me. So once again, thank you, and hopefully you'll do some great work.